A Long Walk to Water, Chapter 3. The Story So Far. As Naya continues to walk, she steps on a thorn and tries to remove it with another thorn. Salva wakes up to find that the Dinka people he was traveling with have left him. Southern Sudan, 2008. The smudge on the horizon gained color as Naya drew nearer, from hazy gray to olive green. The dirt under her feet turned to mud, then sludge, until at last she was ankle-deep in water. There was always much life around the pond, other people, mostly women and girls, who had come to fill their own containers, many kinds of birds, all flap and twitter and caw, herds of cattle that had been brought to the good grazing by the young boys who looked after them. Naya took the hollowed gourd that was tied to the handle of the plastic can. She untied it, dipped up the brown, muddy water, and drank. It took 2 gourdfuls before she felt a little cooler inside. Naya filled the plastic container all the way to the top. Then she tied the gourd back in place and took the padded cloth donut from her pocket. The donut went on her head first, followed by the heavy container of water, which she would hold in place with one hand. With the water balanced on her head and her foot still sore from the thorn, Naya knew that going home would take longer than coming had. She might reach home by noon if all went well. Southern Sudan, 1985. Tears were hot in Selva's eyes. Where had everyone gone? Why had they left without waking him? He thought he knew the answer, because he was a child, who might tire easily and slow them down, and complain about being hungry and cause trouble somehow. I would not have been any trouble. I would not have complained. What will I do now? Selva took a few steps to see what he could see. On the far horizon, the sky was hazy from the smoke of the bombs. Closer, he could see a small pond. Between the pond and the barn was a house, and yes, a woman sitting in the sun nearby. He could tell by her clothing that she was not Dinka, not of his tribe. She wore the clothes of the Jolu tribe. Selva was glad that she was not Nuer. The Nuer and the Dinka had a long history of trouble. No one, it seemed, was sure where Nuer land ended and Dinka land began, so each tribe tried to lay claim to the areas richest in water. Over the years there had been many battles, large and small, between Dinka and Nuer. Many people on both sides had been killed. This was not the same as the war that was going on now between the rebels and the government. The Dinka and the Nuer had been fighting each other for hundreds of years. The woman looked up and saw him. Selva flinched at her glance. Would she be friendly to a Dinka boy? Would she be angry with him for spending the night in her barn? But at least he was not alone now, and that knowledge was stronger than the uncertainty of what the woman might do or say to him. He walked towards her. "Good morning, Auntie," he said, his voice trembling. He spoke in Arabic. No matter which tribe they were from, most people in Sudan could speak and understand a little Arabic. She nodded at him. She was old, much older than Selva's mother. He kept quiet, waiting for her to speak. "You must be hungry," she said at last. She stood and went into the house. A few moments later she came back out and gave him 2 handfuls of raw peanuts. Then she sat down again. "Thank you, Auntie." Selva squatted on his haunches next to her, shelling the nuts and eating them. He chewed every nut into a paste before he swallowed, trying to make each one last as long as he could. The woman sat without speaking until he was finished. "Where are your people?" she asked. Selva opened his mouth to speak, but his eyes filled with tears again, and he could not answer. She frowned. "Are you an orphan?" He shook his head quickly. For a moment he felt almost angry. He was not an orphan. He had a father and a mother. He had a family. "I was at school. I ran away from the fighting. I do not know where my family is." She shook her head. "A bad thing, this war. What are you going to do? How will you find them?" Now it was Selva's turn to shake his head. He had hoped that the woman might have some answers for him. After all, she was an adult. Instead, she had only questions. Everything was upside down. Selva stayed in the woman's barn that night. He began to make a plan. "Maybe I can stay here until the fighting stops. Then I will go back to my village and find my family." He worked hard so she would not send him away, fetching wood for the fire, water from the pond. But the pond was drying up. Each day it was harder to fill the cans. During the daytime Selva could hear the distant booming of the artillery from the fighting a few miles away. With every shell that exploded he would think of his family, hoping they were safe, wondering desperately when he would see them again. On the 4th day the old woman told him that she was going away. "You have seen that the pond is only a puddle now. Winter's coming and the dry season. And this fighting," she nodded her head in the direction of the noise. "I will be leaving to go to a different village near water. You cannot stay with me any longer." Selva stared at her as panic rose inside him. "Why can't I go with her?" The woman spoke again before he could ask aloud. "The soldiers will leave me alone, an old woman on her own. It would be more dangerous for me to travel with you." She shook her head in sympathy. "I am sorry, I cannot help you any more," she said. "Whatever it is, you walk. Just be sure to walk away from the fighting." Selva stumbled back to the barn. What will I do? Where will I go? Those words repeated themselves 1,000 times in his head. It was so strange. He had known the old woman for only a few days, but now he could not imagine what he would do once she was gone. He sat inside the barn and stared out, looking at nothing. As the light grew dimmer, the noises of the evening began, the buzz of insects, the rustling of dry leaves, and another sound, voices. Selva turned his head towards the sound. Yes, it was voices. Some people were walking towards the house, a small group, fewer than a dozen. As they approached, Selva took a sharp breath. In the fading light, he could see the faces of those nearest him. Two of the men had patterns of V-shaped scars on their foreheads. They were familiar patterns, the kind that were given to the boys in Selva's village as part of the ritual of becoming a man. These people were Dinka, his tribe. Could his family be among them? Selva jumped to his feet and rushed forward to greet them. A Long Walk to Water, Chapter 4. The story so far. Having finally reached the distant pond, Naya fills her plastic container with water and prepares for the long walk home. Devastated when the elderly woman with whom Selva is staying says she must leave home without him, Selva has new hope when a group from his own tribe shows up. Southern Sudan, 2008. Naya's mother took the plastic container from her and emptied the water into 3 large jars. She handed Naya a bowl of boiled sorghum meal and poured a little milk over it. Naya sat outside in the shade of the house and ate. Then she took the bowl back inside. Her mother was nursing the baby, Naya's little brother. Take Akir with you, she said, walking towards Naya's sister. Naya glanced at Akir, who was only 5 years old. Naya did not say what she was thinking, that Akir was too small and walked too slowly. She needs to learn, her mother said. Naya nodded. She picked up the plastic container again and took Akir by the hand. Home for just long enough to eat. Naya would now make her second trip to the pond and back, to the pond and back. Nearly a full day of walking altogether. This was Naya's daily routine, 7 months of the year. Daily, every single day. Southern Sudan, 1985. Selva held his breath as he scanned the faces one by one. Then the air left his lungs and seemed to take all hope with it. Strangers. No one from his family. The old woman came up behind him and greeted the group. Where are you going? She asked. A few of the people exchanged uneasy glances. There was no reply. The woman put her hand on Selva's shoulder. This one is alone. Will you take him with you? Selva saw the doubt on the people's faces. Several men at the front of the group began speaking to each other. He is a child. He will slow us down. Another mouth to feed. It is already hard enough to find enough food. He is too young to do any real work. He'll be of no help to us. Somewhere in a far, small corner of his mind, Selva was glad to be hearing the Dinka language again. But in the next moment he realized that being able to understand the words made things much worse. He hung his head. They would leave him alone again, just as the others had. Then a woman in the group reached out and touched the arm of one of the men. She said nothing, but looked first at the man and then at Selva. The man nodded and turned to the group. We will take him with us, he said. Selva looked up quickly. A few in the group were shaking their heads and grumbling. The man shrugged. He is Dinka, he said, and began walking again. The old woman gave Selva a bag of peanuts and a gourd for drinking water. He joined the group, determined not to lag behind, not to complain, not to be any trouble to anyone. He did not even ask where they were going for fear that his questions would be unwelcome. He knew only that they were Dinka and that they were trying to stay away from the war. He had to be content with no more than that. The days became a never-ending walk. Selva's feet kept time with the thoughts in his head, the same words over and over. Where is my family? Where is my family? Every day, Selva woke and walked with the group, rested at midday, and walked again until dark. They slept on the ground. The area turned from scrub to woodland. They walked amongst stands of stunted trees. There was little to eat, a few fruits here and there, always either unripe or worm-rotten. Selva's peanuts eventually ended at the end of the 3rd day. After about a week, they were joined by more people, another group of Dinka, and several Jolu. Men and women, boys and girls, old and young, walking to nowhere. Selva had never been so hungry. He stumbled on somehow, moving one foot ahead of the other, not noticing the ground he walked on, or the forest around him, or the light in the sky. Nothing was real except his hunger. Once a hollow in his stomach, but now a deep buzzing pain in every part of him. Usually he walked amid the Dinka, but today, shuffling along in a daze, he found he had fallen a little behind. Walking next to him was a young man from the Jolu. Selva didn't know much about him, except that his name was Buksa. As they walked along, Buksa slowed down even more. Selva wondered sluggishly if they shouldn't try to keep up a bit better. Just then, Buksa stopped walking. Selva stopped too, but he was too weak and hungry to ask why they were standing still. Buksa cocked his head and furrowed his brow, listening. They stood motionless for several moments. Selva could hear the noise of the rest of the group ahead of them, a few faint voices, birds calling somewhere in the trees. He strained his ears. What was it? Jet planes? Bombs? Was the gunfire getting closer instead of farther away? Selva's fear began to grow until it was even stronger than his hunger. Then, a slow smile spread over Bux's face. There, you hear? Selva frowned and shook his head. Yes, there it is. Come. Buxa began walking very quickly. Selva struggled to keep up. Twice. Buxa paused to listen, then kept going even faster. What? Selva started to ask. Buxa stopped abruptly in front of a very large tree. Ah, he said. Yes. Go call the others. By now, Selva had caught the feeling of excitement. But what shall I tell them? The bird, the one I was listening to, he led me right here. Buxa's smile was even bigger now. You see that? He pointed up at the branches of the tree. Beehive, a fine, large one. Selva hurried off to call the rest of the group. He had heard of this, that the Joe Lou could follow the call of the bird called the honey guide, but he had never seen it done before. Honey, this night they would feast.